Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the epic story of capitalism in India. And wow, is it a story? It's a journey of just staggering wealth, but also really stark contradictions, and of course, immense transformation.
All right, so let's just jump right in. The central question that frames this whole thing is, how did India become a land of both billionaires and, at the same time, the desperately poor? To even begin to answer that, we've got to go back, way back.
So to really get a grip on modern capitalism in India, you can't just start in the 21st century. We have to look at what was there before, and then how colonial rule just completely rewrote the rules.
You know, for centuries, India wasn't just another country. It was known as the Sone ki Chiriya, the golden bird. And for good reason. The economy was built on this incredibly rich tradition of artisanship. I mean, think about the legendary Dhaka muslin, or Banarasi silk. This stuff was famous worldwide. It was a global hub, one of the wealthiest places on Earth, all centered around these really vibrant village economies and powerful merchant communities.
And then the British arrived. And what happened next is just, well, it's striking. It was a systematic de-industrialization. Local artisans who were the best in the world were basically crushed by cheap, machine-made British goods. The entire country was re-engineered. You see, India went from being a producer of finished goods to just a supplier of cheap raw materials, like cotton. And the kicker? That same cotton was then shipped to Britain, turned into textiles, and sold back to India at a massive markup. It created this huge economic vacuum.
So how much are we talking about? Well, one economist, Utsa Patnaik, put a number on it. A staggering $45 trillion. Let that sink in. This idea, it's known as the drain of wealth theory, and it just shows you the sheer scale of the exploitation. This wasn't just trade, you know? It was a fundamental transfer of wealth out of India. And that laid a really complicated, impoverished foundation for the kind of capitalism that would eventually show up.
But you know, out of that colonial shadow, something new started to emerge. A generation of India's first industrial pioneers. But they weren't just about making money. They had this unique nation-building vision. Yeah, these guys weren't your typical businessmen just chasing the next dollar. They saw industry as a tool, a weapon almost, for India's self-reliance. People like Jamsetji Tata and G.D. Birla, they were nationalists first and foremost. They believed that real political freedom was impossible without economic strength. And it's such a fascinating paradox, right? They were using the tools of capitalism to build the economic foundation for a free India, all while still living under a colonial system that was designed to do the opposite.
And the way they did it was just remarkable. Their model was completely different. I mean, they were building massive steel plants when the British said it couldn't be done. They founded world-class science institutes. And get this, they embedded social responsibility right into their companies. We're talking worker housing, pensions, things that were almost unheard of back then. This was way, way before corporate social responsibility became a global buzzword.
Okay, so fast forward a bit. We're now at the watershed moment, the one event that truly defines the India we see today. Let's talk about the crisis and the incredible economic rebirth of 1991.
By 1991, India was literally on the brink of going bankrupt. The country had foreign reserves to cover just 3 weeks of imports. That's it. The old state-controlled, socialist-leaning economy had just completely run out of steam. So, faced with this massive crisis, the government, led by Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and his finance minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, knew they had to make a drastic choice.
And what they did was revolutionary. Their strategy became known as LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization. First, they dismantled the license Raj, this just suffocating system of permits that made it almost impossible to start a business. Then, they started privatizing inefficient state-run companies. And maybe most importantly, they threw open India's doors to the world. This was a massive, fundamental shift from a state-controlled model to a market-driven one.
And this quote from Dr. Manmohan Singh's budget speech that year just perfectly captures the moment. It wasn't just about changing a few policies. No, this was a declaration. It was India saying, we are ready to compete on the global stage. It was a huge and honestly incredibly risky pivot.
So after 1991, everything changes. The very definition of wealth and how you go about creating it begins to transform, led by a new generation of pioneers with totally new ideas.
And here's the core of that shift. You see, we moved from old capitalism, where value was in physical stuff, factories, land, machinery. Owning things made you rich. But in new capitalism, the value is in intangible assets, things like user data, networks, brand recognition. It's not about owning things anymore. It's about controlling access to people. their data, their attention. That became the new gold.
And the perfect example of this is the unicorn startup. This new breed of company really captures the new way of thinking. A lot of these startups don't make a profit for years, sometimes ever. Yet, they're valued in the billions. So why? It's because their value isn't based on what they're earning today. It's based on their potential for future market dominance. How many users they have, how big their network is.
And you can see this progression through the architects of this new game. It starts with someone like Dhirubhai Ambani, who basically democratized capitalism by taking Reliance's IPO to millions of middle-class Indians. He made the stock market a household conversation. Then, decades later, his son Mukesh Ambani unleashes this digital data boom with Jio, which basically built the digital highways for this new economy. And of course, now you have the startup founders of today, the Flipkarts, the Zomatos, building billion-dollar companies not on profit but on data and network effects.
But look, this explosion of wealth, it wasn't a clean burn, not at all. It cast a very long, very dark shadow, and it started to raise some really profound questions about the ethics of this new capitalism and that dangerously close relationship between making a profit and holding political power.
And these numbers from Oxfam, they just lay it out in black and white. This is the central conflict of modern Indian capitalism. You have the top 1% owning 40% of the nation's wealth, while the bottom 50% own just 13%. And let's be clear, millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, which is a phenomenal achievement. But at the same time, the boom has created this immense concentration of wealth at the very, very top. It's a society of just staggering contrasts.
And what's really concerning when you look at this timeline of scams is the pattern. It just keeps happening, from the Harshad method scam that rocked the nation in the 90s right up to recent allegations. In these big events, whether it's market manipulation or a banking crisis, it's almost always the small, everyday investors who pay the highest price. And each time one of these happens, it doesn't just cause financial ruin for people, it chips away at public trust in the entire system.
And this is where we get to the heart of the whole crony capitalism debate. Just think about it for a second. What happens when the lines get blurry between the people who write the laws and the big companies that benefit from those laws? Well, controversial instruments like the now scrapped electoral bonds, they fueled exactly that concern. The worry was that big money could quietly influence policy, creating a playing field that was anything but level.
So all of this brings us to right now, to the present day. India is at a crossroads, and it has to consciously decide what kind of capitalist future it actually wants to build. And the thing is, there's no single path forward. You can look around the world and see different models. You've got the welfare capitalism of a place like Sweden, with high taxes and strong social safety nets. You've got the high-risk, high-reward tech capitalism of the US, or even the state-controlled capitalism of China. India has this amazing opportunity to learn from all of them and forge its own unique path. Ultimately, it seems the goal has to be moving towards a more balanced model, right? A model that still fuels growth, absolutely, but one that also invests heavily in public health and education, one that supports the small and medium businesses that are the backbone of the economy, a model that figures out how to create social security for the millions of gig economy workers, and of course, one that shifts towards green capitalism and sustainability. Really, it all comes down to balancing that drive for profit with a sense of purpose.
So, we'll leave you with this final thought. Is Indian capitalism a powerful engine for growth, or is it a machine that just deepens inequality? For all its incredible successes and its deep-seated failures, the story is far from over. And its next chapter, well, that's still being written. The future really depends on how the country decides to answer that very question.